Thank you, Anthony. And wow, what an angry cabbie causing road rage. We have to get our acts together. With me is federal prosecutor Francey Hakes, former federal prosecutor. Francey, let's talk about that for a second. Looks like there's going to be criminal and civil charges brought for that. People need to keep their act together. It seems like we're lucky no one died. I mean, a car is a dangerous instrumentality, and this driver's running into people recklessly and facing charges. If I were the attorney, I'd be going for punitive damages, civil and criminal charges. What about you?
Yeah, I agree with you, Chris. I just don't understand. Is it just me, or does it seem like everybody's on a hair trigger lately? We see more and more stories like this of road rage, people going crazy, people shooting other people for almost nothing, people getting thrown out of restaurants, people getting angry. Remember the video of the guy grabbing the waitress in the restaurant and her throwing him to the ground? I mean, I just don't know what's going on out there.
Right, and we were on together last week talking about that case out of Florida where road rage caused someone to die at the hands of someone else, being stabbed 6 times and a fatal blow to the heart because they were behind them and the car in front of them didn't go, and that was knocked down to reckless or culpable negligence, a misdemeanor, all because of road rage. So pretty scary what's happening here. It's a theme, if we've been watching Law and Crime and sticking with us, that this has been an ongoing theme and problem that people need to get their anger under control. We are going to continue our coverage with the Tex McIver trial. This is the trial out of Georgia. We are following this case closely. This is our main trial, and the trial is almost done. We are going to now go into prosecution's closing arguments and then come back here for some in-studio analysis. Let's take a look. That is prosecution's closing arguments. And what the prosecution is doing now is saying, okay, in opening statements, we told you what we were going to tell you. Then we put on our trial. And now we're telling you and outlining how we proved our case for each charge and each count for the jury to come back with a guilty verdict. With me is former federal prosecutor Francey Hakes. Francey just told me in my ear that she was a federal prosecutor with a judge in this case. How cool is that?
Yeah, Robert McBurney, a really smart guy, what we call a double Harvard. He went to Harvard undergrad and for law school. A very nice guy, and I'm sure he's conducting the trial professionally and fairly.
So this has been a complicated trial. You know, this has been a case about motive and following the money. And we have listened to and heard some serious experts come in and dissect financial documents that I'm sure are going above the head of the jurors. While this judge might be very smart in conducting the trial professionally, I wonder if the jury is actually following the money in order to follow the law. What do you think, Francey?
Well, I used to call financial cases banker's box cases, and obviously you've got a combination here. You've got financial documents, and that is somewhat complicated, and then you have the murder itself. What the prosecutor is doing now is what we generally call open close, and that is she is doing her first closing argument where she's really just going through the evidence and how it meets the elements of the crime. But you're right. I think financial cases or financial motives can be very complicated, especially if you're talking about people who had complex financial dealings. So I think it does add a difficult element to the case for the prosecution.
So do you think that the jury is actually following it? Because you're talking about a CEO and a top attorney. You're talking about money that is large sums of money that the normal average person on the street cannot even relate to. Do you think that's going to play into the verdict?
Yeah, I think it makes it harder, Carissa. I think people like a simple rationale. Why did X kill Y? And they want a motive. Was it love? Was it money? Was there an insurance policy? Was there a divorce happening? I think those simple rationales are much easier for a jury, but you got to give a jury credit. Generally speaking, when 12 people get in a room together, they tend to be able to figure it out, even if it's complicated.
I mean, but this case is complicated, and not only is it complicated, it's a bit bizarre. I mean, you know, husband is in the car in the back seat, the wife's in the front seat, the best friend's driving, they're in a bad neighborhood. Husband says, you know, honey, can give me the gun? I don't feel safe. She hands him the gun, and then he accidentally shoots and kills his wife. Is that believable, or is there motive?
Yeah, I think it could go either way. That is a very strong defense team. I think that was Don Samuel I saw sitting at defense table, who I went up against many times in my career. So they're a good defense team, and if there's a way to make the jury feel there's reasonable doubt, they'll find it.
So it'll be interesting to see what the jury does in this case. If you were the jurors, what would you say, guilty or not guilty?
Oh, Carissa, I'm not unbiased. I think he's guilty.
Well, you're a prosecutor, right? You're a former prosecutor, and and same with me. I would say guilty as well. However, I think this is a unique case, and the way they dissect it and they show, is he worth more dead, or was she worth more dead, or was she worth more alive to him? Did he need her income, or did he need the insurance policy? Even I am confused following this. So I really wonder what the jury's thinking.
Well, and the other thing that's interesting about this, Carissa, as it sort of talks about our larger justice system is, like I said, that is a heck of a defense team that the defendant has put together. So we're going to see whether or not money can buy justice or buy the result the defendant wants, because he couldn't ask for better lawyers.
Well, I'm sure you and I have both seen cases where you think you're going to win, lose, and cases that you think you're going to lose, win, and you never know what a juror is going to do and what happens in that deliberation room. I can't tell you how many times I wish I was a fly on the wall in that jury room to come up with that decision. Nonetheless, we have to go to a quick break. Stick with us, and we'll come back in a few seconds.
Remember the expert? Remember the expert from the crime lab? Remember him demonstrating the weapon and pulling the trigger when he testified right here?
If the gun is in single action, so with a hammer cocked, it's primed, it's ready to be fired. The only way that the gun will fire is if the trigger is pulled and then held to the rear long enough for the hammer to fall. So if you were to pull the trigger, but then release the trigger, and I'll put my finger here so that I could feel it if it went through, it doesn't touch. Because you notice the trigger
All right, welcome back. That is defense closing arguments in the Tex McIver trial. And as you can see there, the defense is doing a very good job. Well, we'll see what the jury thinks, but the defense is doing its job in trying to show the jury a few things. One, that they have to prove intent, the prosecution, and that is the prosecution's burden, and that the prosecution hasn't met its burden, and therefore he is not guilty. That is what the defense is saying. The defense is also going through different elements of the trial to try to sum it up for the jury, saying, one, it was in a plastic bag. Two, you don't know how the gun was aimed. There's no way to prove that. The prosecution failed on that argument. Three, it was a hairline trigger. It's easy to just trigger the gun and it would go off, that this was an accident. And in order to prove the elements of this crime, the prosecution has to prove intent. There's no issue that he actually killed her. The issue is intent. With me, former federal prosecutor Francey Hakes. Based on that summing up that I just did, what do you think? How's the defense doing?
Well, Chris, I think they're actually doing a pretty good job, although I have yet to hear the argument that I think is the best one, and that is that, generally speaking, you don't kill someone if your intention is to kill them with an eyewitness, because then what's your defense?
Exactly. So how is this going? I have the same issue you do, but we'll see what the jury does. We're going to have to go to quick breaks. We don't have a whole lot of time to talk about this, but I agree. If you want to kill your wife, there's better ways to do it. And you don't do it while your best friend's driving, because she could get into an accident while, when a gun goes off in a car and someone dies next to you and you're driving, she could get into an accident and cause a bunch of other accidents on the road. Much better ways to think about killing your wife if that's your intent. We got to go to a quick break. Stick with us. We will be right back. Welcome back to Law and Crime. I'm Carissa Kranz. As usual here on the network, we follow many trials at once. So in addition to Tex McIver, which we're following closely today as our main trial, we have another case that we are following, and we have our very own Aaron Keller in the courtroom in Kentucky watching this case for us, and he will be reporting live with us whenever there is an update. What case is this? This is the high-profile case of Shayna Hubers. The case is being retried again, now in northern Kentucky. Over the years, this case has garnered much media attention, including a series on 48 Hours, and it still is getting media attention. The question is the jury going to find her guilty again a second time? Right now, she's serving a 40-year sentence. But what happened is one of the jurors did not disclose that they were a convicted felon, so she's getting a new trial. Recently, she had additional media attention because she wanted to get married while in prison, but not a normal marriage. She wanted to marry a lesbian transvestite, and she felt like the jailhouse and the system was retaliating against her. So she had a special interview with the station, and that interview we have for you here. Let's take a look.
In so many cases, and I know it's not this easy because I've interviewed several people that have been in those types of situations. Is there ever a point that you have thought since 2012 and you say, if I could turn back the clock, I would just walk out of the condominium and I would leave?
I don't want to talk about my case with you. I'm not here to talk about the nature of my case or what happened on October 12th. I was here for a different reason today, and that was to address my marriage to Mr. McBee.
Have you ever had any moments of remorse or the sense of apology just to Ryan Poston's family? Not going into specifics.
I'm not here to talk about any of that. I'm here to talk about another issue at hand.
Well, that is interesting. She's here getting media attention. She is about to start trial to retry her case, where Aaron Keller is in the courtroom in Kentucky to cover it for us live here on the network. And with me, I have former federal prosecutor Francey Hakes to dissect what we just saw and heard. So here she is getting media attention because she wants to marry a name that she kept, the name changed. At one point it was Unicorn or Unicoy, Unicorn, I think, and then it was Unique, which is like a unicorn, which is unique, and then his legal name. And she said she's not there to discuss her case at hand. They gave her the opportunity. They opened the door for her to show some remorse, for the media to see that she feels some remorse without being subject to cross-examination. How would you have coached your client for that?
I certainly, Carissa, would have told her not to make it all about her. And I suspect that everything this woman does is all about her. Everything I've read about her offense conduct, her conduct when giving her interviews to the police after the murder, and this.
I know, those interviews are crazy.
Thing.
I mean, I'm sure we're going to replay those here on the network, but I was reviewing them yesterday because we didn't know the status of when this trial was going to exactly start. She could not keep her mouth closed in those interrogation tapes. I mean,
she wants attention.
She wants attention. She's something about her that just seemed very unstable. Singing it within hours of killing her boyfriend at the time. She's pirouetting in the interrogation room, not realizing that she's on camera. And then she says she wants to invoke her right to an attorney, but then she doesn't shut up. She continues to just talk and talk and talk while the police, investigators in the interrogation room, just rotate throughout the room. So.
Yeah. Shayna is all about Shayna, and I suspect Shayna's been that way her whole life.
Okay, well, we will be keeping a close watch on this case, and we will be covering it here on Law and Crime with Aaron Keller. But for now, we're going to go back to Tex McIver. This is the case out of Georgia where the prominent attorney is standing trial for the murder of his wife. She was shot by her husband through the back seat into the passenger seat, front seat of the car while her best friend was driving. He killed her. He claims it was an accident, and the prosecution says, no, 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 there was financial motive and that this was murder. We just heard the prosecution and the defense closing arguments, and now we have the prosecution's rebuttal. Let's take a look. All right, so that was prosecution's rebuttal closing argument in the Tex McIver case. And two things stood out to me there that I just heard in the rebuttal. One is that who's going to stand up for Diane? Who's going to hold Tex McIver accountable? And the second thing that I heard that really stood out to me is whether or not the defense has actually poked the proper holes in the case. With me, Francey Hakes. Let's talk about this really briefly before we have to go to our next break. What do you make of that rebuttal?
Well, just from a process standpoint, setting aside the impact of who will stand for Diane, I think that Clint did a decent job, but he seems very tied to the text on the screen, and that loses the emotional impact when you're reading who will stand for Diane when you just say it as if you're reading it.
Did you pick up when he said, he pointed out and he tried to drive home that they asked her on the operating table if she wanted to see him, and he said no?
Yeah, I thought that was one of the single best pieces of evidence, and he should have emphasized it.
He should have emphasized it. He should have, I agree with you. He should have emphasized that at the end, because that was glossed over. Now, the argument could be she could have been mad at him, and that's why she didn't want to see him. But maybe she thought he was guilty, and that's why she didn't want to see him. Anyway, we need to go to a quick break. We're going to continue following this into a verdict watch. Stick with us, and we will be back in just a few minutes. Wow. Guilty on all counts. That was, for me, sad to watch Tex McIver sitting there listening to that guilty verdict as if the jury did not believe him at all. With me, Francey Hakes. I want to talk to you about this. I mean, I'm shocked, but they must have gotten a unanimous jury verdict here of guilty on all counts. But I still think if you want to kill your wife, there's a better way to do it. You don't do it through a plastic bag in a car with the best friends driving, who's not a witness that you could have had to prove that it was an accident. It was your wife's best friend, but the jury just said guilty on all counts.
Well, Carissa, they found him not guilty of malice murder, which was the biggest count. Although what people don't realize, and I'm sure the jury doesn't know, is that the lesser included is felony murder. The penalty is identical.
Right.
So it really doesn't matter whether he was convicted of felony murder or malice murder. The penalties prescribed by law are the same. And you saw Don Samuel, his defense attorney, shake his head in disbelief when he was convicted of felony murder. I think they thought they had a strong case. And can I just say, this was a bit of a dream team. There's no doubt this is an Atlanta dream team with both Bruce Harvey and Don Samuel on the side of the defense, on the side of the defendant. The defendant could be expected to think he was going to get an acquittal, because that is a team of lawyers, very experienced and very high profile.
And talk about Tex McIver, who lived a very lavish life, a very high-profile life, is now going to spend the rest of his life most likely behind bars. It's a very sad situation for everyone. If he did lack the intent, which the jury doesn't believe that he did lack it, but if he did, he lost his wife, and now he lost his own life too, and he's going to sit behind bars and have to sit with that for the rest of his life. It's no matter how you look at it, it's not a happy ending. We are going to go to a interview with one of the jurors. This is juror number 61, and see what they have to say.
We wanted to see where on your leg would it had been.
So that's what you were looking for there. I've heard that there were some people on the jury who had a lot of experience and expertise with weapons. What did they bring into the jury room?
No. It wasn't that they were experts or expertise. They own guns.
Okay, gun owners.
Yes, some were gun owners. They were not experts or expertise or nothing like that. No, none of us were.
What did they bring to? What did they ultimately bring to the deliberations?
Really, that guns don't just go off. Like, they have guns too. One of the men had a revolver himself, and revolvers just don't go off by themselves.
So let me ask you this, though. When the state's own expert, so the prosecution expert, is up on the witness stand, he's working with the mechanism of the gun, and he accidentally triggered it when he was on the witness stand right in front of you, and the defense played that clip a couple times during the closing argument. So you don't believe a gun can go off accidentally, but didn't that prove that the gun can go off?
He was playing. That man was playing with the gun on the stand. He was playing with the gun. So basically, you're trying to say that McIver was playing with the gun in the back of the seat?
Well, I'm not necessarily saying that. I'm asking you what you found. I mean, the defense said that his finger was on the trigger, and Danny Jo Carter said she heard some clicks before the shot went off, and she wasn't quite sure what they were. So, I mean, is it possible that he was, you know, waking up from being asleep or whatever, and that something there went off, that the bag was wrapped around part of the gun, and his finger applied just enough pressure to it?
No, I don't believe that. No.
So you think that he purposely pulled that trigger back all the way with an intent to violently injure his wife, but that he in no way wanted her dead?
Yes, I do.
So what was the motive then?
It could have been the finances. It could have been the stress.
Well, but if she's alive and she's injured, then how would that have helped his position financially? Wouldn't that have just racked up more bills?
It would have, but he would have been in control.
So he wanted to perhaps incapacitate her. That's it.
I don't find that he wanted to incapacitate her. He did what he wanted to do, and that was for her not to be here. But it did not go his way.
So let me ask you this. This is a mandatory life sentence ultimately. Is that the punishment that you feel and that your fellow jurors feel fits the crime?
I did not know it was a mandatory life sentence. Felony murder, I did not know that. But if that's the sentence for that crime, then yes.
So you think that punishment fits the crime?
Yes.
So as we move on here, you sat on this panel. You were there for more than 20 days as part of this. You heard a lot of interesting testimony.
26 days.
One piece of it was that the prosecution was insinuating some kind of inappropriate relationship between Tex McIver and the massage therapist. A lot of people picked up on that during the state's case. But then when that massage therapist got up on the stand, she said there's nothing inappropriate going on. How did you and how did your fellow members of the jury take that?
They were basing it around a pair of boots. We still don't know besides Miss McIver where that was never really pressed into it. And as far as she's a massage therapist put their hands on people. I didn't see nothing being sexual in between them two.
Did that cut into the state's credibility, though, that the state was trying to probe at that, but they ultimately had to walk it back?
Yes. Because, like I said, I didn't see where as though there were any type of affair going on in my eyes. I didn't. It was all based upon one of the witnesses saying he went to the ranch and she had on a pair of Diane boots.
And there was some evidence that some of those boots may have just been moved to sort of a what you could say is a public boot rack, I guess, where people could just grab whatever boots were there. There were dozens of boots there that anybody who was showing up at the ranch could use it.
Yes.
Was there any one piece of evidence that really jumps out in your mind that this was it, that this is what you relied on to make your decision?
He was in financial distress. He was in financial distress.
So you didn't...
His income was dropping dramatically.
Well, that's true, but I mean, he was 72 years old. It's not uncommon for somebody at that age in a law firm to sort of transition into more of a retirement role.
I understand that. I understand that truly. But at the same time, like I said, his income was dropping dramatically, and he still was living outside his means.
It's an interesting theory. It's certainly an interesting theory. So he wanted to violently injure his wife but not kill her so that he could get control over their finances.
Correct. And that's just the theory. Because we never know the correct answer.
But the state, all through the trial, had said he wanted his wife dead to get control of the finances, and you don't believe that?
Some part of me, like I said, he was in financial distress. He wanted to be in control. He even said in one of his interviews that he likes to be in control.
Wow. So that's an interview with Aaron Keller and juror number 61. Francey, if you and I were sitting there just watching that together, what would you say if Aaron were a juror on that panel? How would he have voted?
I think that's an easy one, Carissa. I think he would have gone for not guilty.
He was wearing his lawyer hat in that, wasn't he? He was saying.
No, he totally cross-examined her.
Cross-examining her, casting doubt on everything that she said, and she just was parroting back the prosecution's conclusory statements. I don't think she really understood it.
Carissa, it's such an interesting thing when you talk to jurors after verdicts. It's always scary, no matter whether they acquitted or convicted, because it's obvious what it looks like is there's inconsistencies in what she understood about the case and what they thought motive was. Yeah, and so it ends up being a compromise verdict, and you simply cannot always ascribe logic to a jury verdict.
No. All she would say, and you saw Aaron pause and kind of look at her in a way that he kept blinking, she kept just using conclusory statements, financial distress. Anyway, we have to go to a quick break. We'll be right back. Stick with us, and we'll continue this discussion. Welcome back to Law and Crime. I'm Carissa Kranz. While we took that quick short break, they finished the press conference in the Molly Tibbetts case. Quick recap. It seems like the only update that they're really willing to disclose right now is that there's a new website, a dedicated website that you can go to give tips, and that the investigation is still ongoing. In order to maintain the integrity of the investigation, they're not disclosing any information that's new, which to me is gleaning insight that possibly the investigators feel that Molly is still alive and to be found, and they don't want to give any information because they don't want to tip off the person that they're on to. But who knows? With me, Francey Hakes, former federal prosecutor. We were listening to that together, but we haven't had a chance to discuss it. What were your takeaway points from that?
Well, unfortunately, Carissa, I might have to take a pessimistic view on this. I'm worried that the reason that they've set up this website is because they really don't know where Molly is and what happened to her yet, and want to continue to receive tips from the public in a more streamlined and easier way. So I'm a little bit depressed after that press conference. I was hoping for some good news, and I think we got the opposite.
Yeah, it's really hard to tell because we're not getting information, and it's easy to assume the worst when you don't have information. Before we went into that press conference, we were listening to our very own Rachel Stockman discuss the case of Elizabeth Smart with Elizabeth's father, Ed Smart. And I think that the takeaway points from that interview was hope. And when a parent knows something deep down inside, they have this renewing energy that she might still be alive and there, that sometimes there's a happy ending and a positive outcome when you pursue hope and you engage the public. That was what they said. And right now, in the Molly Tibbetts case, they're engaging the public. They now have a public website, and the funds are now almost $367,000 as a reward to bring Molly home safely.
Well, and yeah, Carissa, I mean, reward money is incredibly helpful because people are motivated by money. So if they were thinking to themselves, you heard them say at the beginning of the press conference, if you think someone else has already called in this same tip and that's why you've not called, don't think that way. Go ahead and call us, because even the smallest detail might help. And the reward money will encourage people to call in things that they know. It will also encourage lunatics to call in, which is sadly something that the law enforcement people and personnel will have to deal with in this case. But it will encourage people who might have information to call in, and I hope it does.
Do you feel that they could have answered more questions in order to appease the public questions, because the public is donating money and trying to come up with a reward? I mean, do you think that they were too tight-lipped?
You know, Carissa, it's so tricky. You want to give the public some information to give them hope and make them think that their continued cooperation might help find Molly. On the other hand, you don't want to jeopardize the investigation, and they're doing things like tracking her cell phone and her Fitbit data. He said they had engaged in 500 interviews, and they had searched all over the county, inside and outside the county, barns and silos and homes and wooded areas. So he told us as much as I think that law enforcement is ever able to at this stage of the investigation.
Yep, that's a good point. I think that at this point they want to maintain the integrity of the investigation, and during any investigation that is ongoing and very much alive, officials have the right to not disclose because they don't want to in any way put at risk the possible hopeful return of Molly coming home alive and well. We have more coverage on this and other things here on the network, but we must throw to a quick break. So stick with us. We'll be right back. Thanks, Bob. That was a great interview, and that was before the press conference. And ironically, if you're listening to it after the press conference, it seems like it could still apply because we have no new real information, except now we have a dedicated website for more tips and a little bit more money, a lot more money, $320,000 to $367,000 added towards a reward. But we still want answers. We still have questions. Where is Molly Tibbetts? And investigators are not giving up information because they do not want to compromise the integrity of the investigation. With me is former federal prosecutor Francey Hakes. Francey, if you were listening to that interview with me, I actually think that reporter did an excellent job breaking it down. That local reporter, she must be covering that case pretty extensively. And she seemed to agree with me that it's possible that she is still alive, and that is why they're not giving up the details, because they believe they don't want to lead anyone into knowing or tip off the perpetrator in this situation, but that she very much could be just kidnapped. And that was an interesting distinction. At what point does this turn from a missing persons case to an abduction case?
Well, Carissa, those are all great points. And I think, I've certainly had cases. There's a very famous case with a young lady whose name I won't use, where she was kidnapped from her house at the age of 15 and held in someone's basement for 4 or 5 days before authorities located her and rescued her. I'm not saying that it's impossible for Molly Tibbetts to still be alive 3 weeks after her disappearance. I'm just saying, sadly, I think it is unlikely. But because there is still the possibility that she is alive, of course, law enforcement has to focus on that possibility and go forward as if that were in fact the case, so that they don't do anything in case Molly's alive that either harms her or harms a later case to be made against her captors or abductors.
Well, the good news is on this case is that they don't have a body. They now have a search warrant for the Fitbit, which could lead them to some location of where she may have been, and that now this is having national exposure, which means Molly could be found anywhere. We have to go to a quick break, but stick with us. We're going to continue following this case. Welcome back. I'm Carissa Kranz. That is the press conference in the Molly Tibbetts case from just moments ago. It is breaking news. However, the only new thing that's breaking that we got from investigators is that there's a new dedicated website. It's findingmolly.iowa.gov, where they are going to be funneling tips in order to be more efficient and hoping to bring Molly home safely. They really are tight-lipped in this press conference, reluctant to discuss any new information or even how their search is going to be done. With me, Francey Hakes, former federal prosecutor. I wanted to give some insight to the viewers and listeners as to what might be done in a search to bring Molly home, since investigators won't even disclose to us what they're doing, as if not to tip off the perpetrator that they may be onto. So what do you think that they're doing in order to find Molly?
Well, actually, Carissa, one of the very significant things that happened as we looked back at the press conference again from the very beginning, there was new information if you were paying attention, and that is that they have obviously consulted a profiler, because the information that the law enforcement official was giving us at the very beginning, asking people to look at people that they know and interact with and interacted with around July 18th for changes in behavior. And that is based on their observations of offender behavior after their known crimes. Things like changing their appearance, getting rid of a vehicle, not being where they were supposed to be, or being unable to be reached during the significant period overnight from the 18th to the 19th. So that was very interesting information that I think certainly tells us that they have been consulting with profilers in order to make their search more meaningful and to get the public's assistance based on past observation of past offender behavior.
Okay, and just so we know, we also have an update in another case we're following here on Law and Crime that we're going to be covering live with Aaron Keller, one of our very own hosts here out of Kentucky. It's the Shayna Hubers trial, and the update for the day is no jury is officially seated yet, but we're keeping a close eye on that as well as we continue to follow the Molly Tibbetts case and try to engage the public as much as possible in order to find Molly and bring her home. We still have a few minutes left to discuss this Molly Tibbetts case. Obviously, we all want to bring her home safely. There's a reward. The parents are holding out hope. Today, we listened to Rachel Stockman's interview of Ed Smart, Elizabeth's dad, which gives us hope that there are happy endings at times. Is there anything, Francey, that you'd like to add as a closing thought or a closing moment before the end of the day? Because we will be picking this up again tomorrow fresh.
Yes, Carissa, I think it is important for all your viewers and listeners to know that they could, if they live in the area or travel through the area, they could have vital information, and they should go to that website, findingmolly.iowa.gov. Even if it's something small, something out of the ordinary, someone that you love or know or live with who has been behaving differently since July 18th, that kind of tip could be the difference between finding Molly alive or not.
Yeah, and I think that they outlined it very well about paying attention to your surroundings on that date and any unusual behavior of people in your life, change of facial hair, change of phone numbers, going to work, not showing up to work, drinking patterns, all these things that could help us engage a national search that could lead us to finding Molly either alive or the awful, horrible thought that nobody wants to entertain right now as finding a body that's no longer with us. So we are going to continue to cover this. However, we do need to wrap up for the day here. Thank you, Francey, for staying with us, and we will see you back here tomorrow at 9 a.m.